Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. We're going to talk a little bit about interfaith dialogue today, but I want to kind of frame it in a way that helps us understand just how important interfaith dialogue is. Along with many of you, when the planes hit the Twin Towers, I was in the middle of trying to get my children ready to go to school. They both watched as the planes hit the Twin Towers. And my daughter asked me at that moment, just before I could turn the TV off, because I realized that something nefarious and something terrible was happening at the time. She asked me the question, why did those planes hit those buildings? And I've been struggling for the last 27 or 20, well, it's 23 years, 22, 23 years, trying to figure out how to answer that question. And as I've grown in my understanding of things, I've also realized that it represents not only a terroristic event, but it was also religiously inspired. And oftentimes these religiously inspired events get a lot of publicity. So we have that event, and then fast forward to what transpired in Israel just this last year, where Hamas attacks Israel, and we find out that it's a religiously inspired event. Between those two events, we've had mass shootings that have been religiously inspired. We have Christian nationalism, which has become more and more a problem for not only folks who are minorities, because it usually gets cloaked as a white Christian nationalistic event. We see violence inherent within, or being talked about through the religious lens. But yet, in spite of all of that, there are also really good things that happen within religion. If it weren't for religion, for instance, we might not even have a democratic society that we have. Without religion, we wouldn't have egalitarian voting rights. We would have, we may not, without religion, we may not have hospitals. We might not have public schools. Without religion, a lot of the good things that are part of our culture wouldn't be there. So how do we balance these two things? And how does interfaith dialogue help us to understand that? To help me talk through these issues is Douglas Taylor. Douglas Taylor is no stranger to Encounter. You've been on for many times over the course of its history, and I want to welcome you back to Encounter. It's been a while since you've been on. Welcome to Encounter.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, Joe. I appreciate the invitation.
So when you think about religion, and not only are you the minister at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Binghamton, you also are the chair of Children of Abraham, which is a place or a venue or a platform for religious talk between folks from varying religious perspectives. Let's talk a little bit about first, why do people who are inspired by religion turn to violence?
Yeah, that's a struggle. That is an absolutely valid question to weigh into. I think that there's an aspect of religion that is life-giving and gives hope, leads people to do great things, but I think that there's also an element in religion that leans more toward control and a sense of being right that sets up an aspect of doing things out of that sense of rightness, of being right and being divinely authorized to do things, that lends itself toward violence, which I would counter to say that one of the great needs for a religious dialogue is freedom. You know, to be able to be free to check in with each other so that that plurality of understanding can flourish rather than a rigidity of being in control. Because I think that controlling piece is there, and that's a part that leads us toward some of the violence that you talked about right at the beginning.
Now, one of the things that often gets played out in dialogue, and I've seen it happen, and I've actually been the recipient of it as well, because I'm usually a voice for tolerance and understanding and acceptance of people of varying faiths. Even in the face of my own my own denomination at times, or my colleagues at times, because I don't think that we usually give a fair especially within a Christian dominated country like what we have in the United States. We don't give other faiths the benefit of the doubt at times. Mm-hmm. So especially when it comes to Muslims. So after 9/11, we characterized all Muslims as being this way, mm-hmm. and we didn't hear the voice of moderates who were trying to call for a different approach to it. We didn't even give them a platform to talk about it. So, how do we get beyond the noise, I guess, is the question. How do we get beyond the noise that's created by the event itself to understanding faith in a more deep way, I think, is the question. And giving Muslims like the appreciation that Muslims deserve.
Mm-hmm. I think, Joe, there's a piece of this that's a very American difficulty, and I don't know that it's exclusively American, but there's an urge for immediacy.
Yeah.
For a quick response and an answer. And a faith perspective, when well done, slows us down.
Right.
And helps us to go deeper so that we can really listen to our own faith tradition, let alone the voices of others. And so to slow down when there's such a push by society to come up with a quick answer, a quick condemnation, a quick snap response to something that's going on in the news, especially the way that America is functioning now, it's hard to pull back from that. It's hard to slow down. But I think most religious traditions have a component where it's of value to take some time to read your scripture, to listen to the messages from within your own faith about what is the depth of how to be a good person, how to have empathy for a scenario that's playing out. When you can do that I think opens you to also then listen. Because if we can listen, we can begin to hear our neighbors in faith who are listening to a different depth than my own.
Because one of the biggest problems that I had was with people who were basically saying all Muslims are this way, and they wouldn't say the same thing about all Christians are this way. So, they would say that Christians don't behave violently, that Christians don't, give other people the benefit of the doubt.
Which is patently untrue.
It's not. Exactly. That's what I would say, is that, without that understanding of our, or the confession, or the understanding that at times our religion has added to the problem instead of being a part of the solution. So, one of my mentors is Jim Wallace, and from Sojourners, and Jim Wallace has often said that the problem with bad faith isn't necessarily no faith, because we also know that travesties have taken place because of folks who have no faith. There's arguments that go back and forth about whether Stalin was no faith or faith, and there's all sorts of other issues that kind of come up with that. But when we start thinking about faith as what is bad faith and what is good faith, because we do know that faith does have progressive and creative aspects to it, right? So how do we balance those two things out, and how do we kind of figure out where we stand in the midst of all that?
Yeah.
That's.
I actually have an answer to that, because I've been digging at that exact question for a while, and I keep coming back to something that a professor of mine had given to the class when I was in seminary back in the late 90s. He said, everybody will interpret the text, the teaching, the message, whatever, everyone interprets. And so the best tool he had to offer us was the question for discerning: is this interpretation life-giving or life-denying? So it's less a question of, is it true? Less a question of, has it been documented as something other people agree with? Is it popular? It becomes a question of life. Is this interpretation of your scripture, of your pastor, of your scenario of what's right, is it life-giving?
And that is the ultimate question, isn't it? So, one of my other mentors is Eboo Patel. I don't know if you've run across any of his work.
Absolutely.
But the work that he's done in the Interfaith Youth Corps has been to build bridges that lead toward life by creating the possibility of people of various faiths working together in order to accomplish, good work within the world. So they feed people, they clothe people, they build things together that lead toward what you're talking about as far as life is concerned. So, what have you seen as far as interfaith cooperation, and how do those bridges get built, and what is the result of them?
So I think some of the best opportunities are to engage together around something that isn't studying. Yes, there's a value in getting together in the room and studying religion together in a broader lens. But some of the best beginnings of interfaith dialogue that I've discovered is to get together and do a project together, to feed some people who are hungry, to build a bridge, metaphorically or literally. I know the Council of Churches does a ramp building for people who have mobility issues and need help. So there's a coming together, not about an element in which you would disagree, but about something that you all agree. We're going to help a person in need or a people who are in need. You've done common work together. You've probably eaten food together. There's some remarkable thing that happens, and lots of different religions talk about breaking bread together.
Right.
Once you begin to see each other as human beings together, rather than other, things can open up better. I think that's to do some things together helps open up a way of thinking and a way of seeing and being together. I know that you framed our time together as interfaith dialogue, but I think some interfaith being together
Right.
opens up the opportunities for interfaith dialogue.
And in what ways have you seen that locally? I mean, the Children of Abraham is obviously one of those places where we've seen interfaith cooperation on a macro scale in a lot of ways. I mean, it is kind of our way of approaching interfaith cooperation. So what have you seen in that?
Well, one of the first things that the Children of Abraham did together was host an event under a tent
Right, yeah.
at the Islamic Organization of the Southern Tier, and invited prominent leaders from each of the Abrahamic traditions to stand up and speak for a few minutes about why their faith calls them to engage across differences. And then we got into circles and talked. And so that was dialogue. That wasn't an action per se, but there was an enacting of Abraham's tent was the story that was used to bring together the Islamic and the Jewish and the Christian voices to be able to be in the room together, to be under the tent together. And so to appeal to that common story was one beginning point. From there, I think one of the key ingredients was that we made a point of hosting conversations where we invited people to get to know one another as human beings, as individual, people, rather than a representative, rather than as, an example of, but just as a person. And that opened up the kind of understanding that I think interfaith dialogue is aiming for.
One of my memories from the Children of Abraham was meeting Edisham Siddiqui. Edisham is the president of the Islamic Organization of the Southern Tier, and up until coming under the tent of Abraham, I had only known him as a vice president from BAE, and I had seen his name a few places, and yet when you start to meet Edisham and you get to know him, his wife, and the family, and all of that kind of thing, you see a different person, than just the head of BAE Systems in our area. You find that he's filled with hope. He's filled with aspirations, filled with dreams. There's a reason that he lives in the United States versus where he grew up. There's all kinds of issues that kind of converge outside of that, and you begin to see a whole person, and not just a Muslim. And I think that's an important thing that Children of Abraham does. It's an action that it does, is that it lets us see each other in a more holistic way. But then the other thing that I love about it too is that there have been some very tangible outcomes. So we participated together in the putting together food kits for third world countries, people who are facing starvation. They can't be fed by the same food that you and I eat when we're sitting down. There's a
Right, they're at a point of starvation. Their bodies can't metabolize, a chicken dinner. Right,
and so we put together food kits that went along with that to go out into areas where people were starving. One of my other favorite things was when we built a ramp together. The youth from the Presbyterian Church and the Unitarian Church and from the Islamic organization as well as from the Jewish temple got together and they built a ramp together, and they helped a family access life together.
To have a couple of adults from each of those communities supporting the youth from those communities coming together and picking up a hammer and helping, cut the wood and assemble this ramp. I don't know if there were lasting friendships that were born out of that. They only knew each other for a couple of hours over a couple of days, one weekend, but it established an experience that is in their heads, that is in my memory, as this is the kind of thing that I do.
Right.
And so to have that opportunity to be together in the good work is an opening.
Yeah, it is. And without those connections being made, I brought my kids to a Children of Abraham event when they were in high school, and we were talking about sharing a common table and hospitality, sharing it with each other. And we're sitting around the table and we're eating, and all of a sudden they realized that some of the Muslim kids they went to school with, or there was some Jewish kids that were there at the there too, and they didn't realize that their faith, what their faiths were, because they never talked about it. Mm-hmm. But as soon as they started talking to each other, they realized, well, this is the reason why they're kind, why they're considerate, why they're a voice of moderation and peace within the school. And things started, the pieces started to make sense, if that makes any sense. And I think that's another place where interfaith dialogue helps us, is by giving us, a clearer picture of why we are what we are. Because without that, I wouldn't know you.
Right.
Just think.
Well, and the part that excites me in that kind of encounter is the goal is not to convert.
Right.
The goal is not to proselytize. The goal is to meet.
Right.
And to meet each other and to learn. So what I've discovered personally is that my faith gets deeper because I understand it more. Because I bump into somebody for whom they have a strict diet that they have to abide by because of their faith.
Right.
And so I don't. My faith doesn't call me to have a strict diet, but I listen now, and I'm checking in, like, what is it about your faith that requires this of you, and how do you navigate that? Because I don't have that. Mm. But that gets me thinking about my own faith. What does my faith require of me? If it's not a special diet,
right.
What is it?
Right.
And I might not have felt prompted to think about that if I hadn't encountered somebody for whom something that just is I don't even think about it, but they think about it all the time. So it got me to start thinking about it. That doesn't convert me. It doesn't mean I become more strict in my diet. It means I become more aware.
And more human.
Yeah.
And that's that.
Yes, more human.
More human, because we understand that it's a common hunger or common need that drives us to understanding other people.
Well, and we meet differences and we learn. I mean, there's a risk in interfaith dialogue because, or it feels like there could be, because meeting differences can be a challenge to what we know and what we trust. But if it's not truth, it's worth getting challenged. It should be knocked down. But truth can meet challenge, and so if what you believe can't handle that kind of challenge, spend a little more time with that.
Yeah.
But because by meeting people across differences, I developed some humility.
Right.
I learned to be a little looser in how tightly I'm holding something, right? I can relax a bit, and this truth that is important to me doesn't fall away, because it's still true. right? But just because somebody else has different words for it, or has a different understanding of it, or for them, that's not how what God is asking of them.
Right.
Right? It's one of the deeply important things for me, and this is why I come into interfaith dialogue. This is my personal rationale, is the thumbprint theology. That there's a statement about how every fingerprint, every thumbprint is unique to each human being, kind of like every snowflake is different. And there's scientific evidence to back that up, and I know that there's forensic evidence that refutes it, but what the forensic evidence refutes is that the image that we make with ink isn't unique. The image that we make out of our fingerprints doesn't hold up the way that we talk about with uniqueness, but the actual fingerprint does.
Yeah.
So take that metaphor. You can take that one as far as you want, but the piece that I resonate with is that my soul, my spirit, has a print. How I engage with the universe, how I engage with God, has its own whirls and ridges like a fingerprint does, a thumbprint does, and it's unique. My interaction, what God calls of me, is mine. I can witness it to you, but you shouldn't copy me because you have your own fingerprint. And we look at nature, we look at the world, trees, every tree is different. You can clump them all together as elm trees or as Methodists, and that's fine. They can be that kind of tree. But each one is unique because of the context in which they grew. Each human being is unique. So I'm not challenged by differences. I'm enlivened by them. And I think interfaith dialogue helps that come more full and open for me.
So one of my memories of my daughter, so I'll go back to her at the end. My daughter, when she was born in a homeless shelter. I like to tell people that. She and my son were both raised in a homeless shelter. And I would often cook for a large quantity of people in the homeless shelter. I was a resident director. And they would sit around the table. So my daughter learned to eat at a table with homeless men. Mm-hmm. And we were eating spaghetti. I still remember this. And you know what a 1-year-old, or less than 1-year-old, how they eat spaghetti. Mm-hmm. So she's covered in spaghetti sauce. She's got spaghetti coming off of her hands, the whole 9 yards. And she sees a black man sitting next to her, deep coffee skin. Mm-hmm. And she raises up that grubby hand. And do you know what that man did?
I bet he leaned in.
He leaned in because
we're human.
And he allowed her to put his fingers there. He leaned in. So I lean into your fingerprint, you lean into mine.
Yeah.
And together we can become more human. And that's our prayer for you today. Be more human with each other and learn to walk in love.